Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have Givelle Lamano here with us to talk about starting and running a criminal defense law firm. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together with the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have Givelle Lamano here with us to talk about starting and running a criminal defense law firm. Welcome, Givelle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, to start us off, can you just give our listeners a little bit of background so that they have kind of some context for where you're coming from here?
Sure. I'm the owner of a criminal defense law firm, Lamano Law Office in the Bay Area, California. We essentially keep people out of jail and have a 98% success rate of doing that.
Wow.
Thank you. We've been featured on Forbes, INC, and other major publications on issues surrounding women in leadership, women in business, diversity, equity, inclusion, and just social justice and criminal reform.
Awesome. And was law school something that you knew you were going to do, or was this something you came to kind of in a roundabout way?
No, I was graduating undergrad and realized I wasn't ready to be an adult and to have the responsibilities of joining the workforce. So I figured, why not go to grad school? And law school just seemed more attractive than med school or other options.
There you go. It's probably not an uncommon story. I mean, I decided randomly to go to law school one day at lunch because I said, I think I'll move to New York. And my coworkers were like, what are you going to do in New York? And I thought about it for a second and said, well, maybe I'll go to law school.
Yeah, I didn't even know what the LSAT was or what any of that was. So it was a very Elle Woods, Legally Blonde approach, but I'm a brunette. So anyway, it is what it is, but here we are.
Here we are, right. And if people do want to learn more about your work, just for reference, where would be a good place to look?
The easiest way is to just hop on our Linktree, which links all of our social media handles and website. And that's linktr.ee/Lamano Law.
Nice. Awesome. I love it. It's very, very modern. Well, one question, when you were in law school, did you plan to start your own firm, or was this something that developed later? What was your career path like?
My career path was pretty much sink or swim. I wasn't the most attractive candidate for employment. I didn't have an accolade of awards or any Callies or Witkins, and I didn't graduate from a top-notch school with honors or at the top of my class. So I started my practice because I needed to make money to support myself, and I did it simultaneously while starting a nonprofit organization. I was also single. I didn't have kids. I was living in a studio apartment with like $1,000 in rent in San Francisco while also working a bunch of restaurant jobs in my late 20s. So I had a lot of energy and I was excited to just dip my feet in anything that would allow me.
So you did this basically right out of school?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that definitely seems pretty challenging. Running a business is pretty different from just practicing law or, working as an intern or something. How did you learn what you needed to know to start and run your firm, particularly doing it straight out of school?
Well, at first, when I started my firm, most of my clients were other attorneys who had an overflow of work. And so that was a way for me to gain experience in the criminal defense world. The biggest thing were finding the right mentors, which led me to business coaching and flexing that muscle as a business owner and an entrepreneur, which I enjoyed more than arguing in court or writing motions. Plus, business coaching helped me learn to hire attorneys and people that were smarter than I was when it came to legal work.
Yeah, that's an interesting path. Another friend of mine who's been on the podcast started her firm. She now does trust and estates work, but she started doing freelance attorney type of stuff. She even wrote a book on kind of like how to do this freelance pathway. Then she realized that people who were going to do this probably just would do it and not buy the book, and people who were not ever going to do it might read the book but never take action. But
yeah, I think perfection is probably the biggest enemy of progress, and a lot of people that I spoke to before starting my practice were naysayers saying that it was really hard, but those people aren't in business anymore. So I definitely think grit and life experience and self-awareness and confidence in yourself are necessary components to starting a firm and knowing that if it doesn't work out, life goes on.
Right. I mean, I think when we started this business, like certainly if you told me I would be running a business before I did it, I would be like, that's ridiculous. I don't know anything about any of this. Like, I don't know anything about accounting or marketing or any of this. But yeah, I think you just have to learn it. I mean, it's like anything else. If
Hmm.
you've gotten through law school, you're clearly able to learn things. So, obviously you can probably learn how to find someone to build your website or whatever it is.
Exactly. I think another tool that was really helpful for me as well, as far as my journey to self-awareness and understanding what my zone of genius was, as far as, you know, what I was good at as an entrepreneur or small business owner, were two tools: the Gallup Strengths Finder test, which is like $20 to tell you what your top five strengths are, and
Hmm.
the DISC profile, which explains how you work in a group setting. So what I did was hire people that weren't exactly like me and who had complementing strengths, because if you're a go-getter, you don't want to put somebody in a library if they're good at sales.
Right. That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that one. I've done the Strengths Finder. Another ex lawyer, a friend of mine who went into kind of HR stuff, recommended that one. She was having all of her friends do it and talk about it. But yeah, I haven't heard of this one where it's sort of like who you should work with. That's interesting.
Yeah, I remember in law school, everybody had their study groups, and I hopped around from different groups until I realized that the way that I prepared for the bar exam, knowing this, was I was an auditory learner. I needed to
Hmm.
be able to explain things in order to make sure that I understood it and mastered it. And I even remember for the bar exam, I had this long mnemonic that represented every single subject area that had a mini mnemonic after that. So the disc profile is just, how do you work? Do you want to go in your cave and learn things on your own and then talk about it, or do you want to talk about it at first? So it's a good return of investment.
No, that's super interesting because I'm a very visual learner. And so I'm terrible with mnemonics. Like when you talk about a mnemonic of your mnemonics, I'm like, wow, that is literally my worst nightmare. Like I would never be able to remember that.
Yeah, and I'm not a good visual person. Like, I still can't read a map well, even though I run a
uh,
business.
Yeah, I was like in law school, I was like coloring my flow charts, and a friend of mine came over. At one part I was like making flashcards, and I was also like a study group. I was not like a monogamous study group person. I was like always flitting around and like trying this person or that person. And so I had some friends over studying for a specific test. And finally he was just like, "What are you doing? Like you're sitting there coloring pictures. This is not elementary school. Like what are you doing?" It was just really funny. I was like, "This is the way I process."
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, because when right before I took the bar exam, my academic advisor had suggested that I might have some learning disabilities, and I was highly offended because I thought, it took me so much just to get into law school, because I thought that that was something I should be ashamed of, having learning disabilities. But the questions on the our tests that people were getting right, I was getting wrong, and the ones that people were getting wrong, I was getting right. So I learned that mnemonics and my learning disability coupled together helped me pass the bar exam on the first try. And so I was in this room, the smaller room for the bar exam, with other people that had disabilities. And the first thing that I did as soon as I sat down was just write out my entire outline using mnemonics.
Oh,
So
that's
whatever works for
awesome.
you. Yeah.
No, that would make sense. And yeah, that's a great piece of advice for anybody who's struggling with memorization is like come up with something like that, whether it's like a visual structure or just something you can write down with letters really quickly. And,
Hmm.
if nothing else, it's going to give you a lot more confidence. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Tell me a bit more about doing criminal defense work because I think this is one of those areas people are always like, "Oh, that's like such a like real life, like sexy area of law." What are kind of some of the challenges here and some of the things you enjoy about it?
Well, somebody once used the analogy of having X amount of energy tickets per day. And I think everybody can relate. You meet with some people and they just take up all of your energy, and you meet with other people and they just, boost your energy and you feel refreshed. I think that the challenges of criminal defense is the demographic of people going through the revolving door of the criminal justice system. It can take away your energy tickets just because it's life. It makes you question whether there is a God out there, if all these bad things happen to good people, so specifically, victims of crime who didn't do anything. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are accused of crime often include minorities, people of color, people from lower income brackets. And I grew up dirt poor, so I saw firsthand how a lot of my peers fell into the traps of early pregnancy, drug use, crime to survive, and how a lot of what we learn in our formative years stem from what we see at home. So while we are successful at keeping people out of jail, we like to take a more holistic approach by trying to identify what the root cause were of the allegations that were made against them, so that we don't have repeat clients, and help change intergenerational trauma. So it takes a lot out of me when I hear somebody's story and why they might be in the criminal justice system, and that just pains me. But the joy includes going inside prisons and helping those that are incarcerated with second chances, helping people clean up their records, just watching the journey of self-awareness, forgiveness, compassion by both the victims and the aggressors. So, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, I've always thought like, oh, I definitely would be like on the criminal defense side. But then like one of our tutors is a prosecutor, and it was really interesting hearing her story because she, as a child, was a victim of a fairly serious crime and was inspired to go to law school by the prosecutor that she worked with. So that kind of opened my eyes like, oh yeah, right. There are really like, these are muddy issues. This is not like a cut and dried situation in either direction.
Yeah, and you can tell when you go into court, who the baby lawyers are and who the real experienced ones are, and which ones have life experience. Because some of my closest friends are district attorneys. They were at my wedding. They're the godmother of my future children. We all come from different backgrounds, and I think especially in the legal world, it's a man's playing field, and there's a special place for you know women who don't empower other women in hell. And I think we just need to lift one another up, because there aren't many of us in the criminal defense sector on top of, the legal sector. So, that everybody's gone through their own thing, and it's not what you learn in law school where everybody's so adversarial. You get the best deals by your reputation, which takes years to build and just minutes to ruin.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that's true across the board in the law. People forget it's a very, very small world.
Oh, yeah.
And, even as a law student listening to this, really think about the impression you're leaving with people, because you just don't know when you're going to come back around and see them again. It does happen.
Humility is huge. And people will forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And if you're a jerk, they'll remember that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are definitely still people from law school where I'm like, oh, I remember that person being a complete jerk. I don't remember anything else about them, but I definitely remember that incident,
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember in law school, if you didn't do well the first year, you were put on academic probation.
Right.
I don't know if that's still the case, but there was a group of people in our small group as 1Ls that made a list of people that they bet were going to be on that. And I was at the top of that list, no doubt. Like, they all had their money on me. And it's funny because in my first 5 years, I would see some of those people in court, and they saw how I was doing really well. And it was those same people that were looking for work from me. And I just, I just had to humble myself and just remind myself, like, as much as this feels petty and good, like, haha, look at you now, look at me, I was like, wait a minute, there's something behind this, and why they were so insecure about making a list of people who were going to fail, while some of us were just trying to figure out how to succeed.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard some version of that story. Like, someone was really mean to me, and then I went to a different job, and then suddenly they wanted me on their side to hire me, and I was like, I don't think so,
Yeah, and I also want to say that there's a value in when you screw up and then acknowledge it and apologize, because Who wants to be friends with somebody who never messes up? You actually like people more when they mess up, acknowledge it, and apologize, and you become closer to them and can relate to them more because it's more authentic and real.
I think that's totally true. These were probably, in this situation I'm thinking of, probably not people who would ever apologize for anything. But that's also like why my friend was like, you know what? I would definitely not hire you because I don't think that you're a nice person to work with.
And another thing that I learned is the art of an apology. Because I grew up in a house where my parents would make mistakes or yell at us, and then the way that they wanted to make up was by saying, do you want to grab food or get McDonald's? Right. So I've learned that when you apologize, there should be no excuses behind it. It should be as soon as you realize you're wrong. And if they want to know why you did it, then you can explain that. But an apology is just compromise when you say, I'm sorry I did this, but you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's really just like, I'm very sorry I did this. I totally accept responsibility for my part in it. And, that's it. You can always have a longer conversation later. That would be a great podcast, actually.
Yeah, and those are the bedside manners that they don't teach us in law school, you
Oh,
know?
no, not at all. No. And I think so much of law, I mean, I think what people forget when we're in school and it's all about like the test and the this and the that is like law is about people,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to understand people and relate to people. And, depending on the type of work you're doing, it may be people who are really different from like the way that you are, the way you grew up. I think is so critical.
Yeah, one of the things that sets us apart from our competitors is that we explain the law in plain English. Because I remember being in law school and, you know, embarrassingly, I don't even know what the freaking Constitution was. I was just trying to avoid being an adult and responsible. So I had to take a step back and go into office hours. And I remember my con law professor going, "Where are you from? And how do you not know what the Constitution was?" And I just, I felt stupid, but he explained it to me in plain English. So I always valued that.
No, I think that's great. And I think so many people in law school also feel like they didn't come from the background, the classic kind of thing that people think of. And I remember, with a good friend of mine in law school, and he'd grown up like in a pretty rough neighborhood. And he was just like, it just like cracks me up to even be here. And I was like, no, I feel the same. I grew up in this town of 6,000 people in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. And like here we are in New York City with like all these, I mean, literally like some of the people in my class were like, the children of very, very famous people. And we're just like, what are we even doing here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But if I could go back to my law school days, I would have made more connections and more friends with people that were a lot different from me, because I don't want to surround myself with a bunch of people who just agree and see the same things the same way that I do. I want to have meaningful conversations with people who will show me my blind spots.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And that was kind of one of the fascinating parts for me. Like I had intentionally avoided kind of Ivy League schools my whole life. I was like, these are snobby places, and they are.
Mm-hmm.
But being in one of them, I mean, for a couple of years was just fascinating because you're like, these people are really crazy different than I am.
Yeah, there's a TikTok video that I just saw yesterday that was like, tell me something that your rich friends would say that just blows your mind. Like, where do you go for the summer? You're like, to work?
Right. No, totally. They're like, oh, not the Hamptons. Like, what? I'm like, oh, this is one of our Hamptons houses. Would you like to see the other one? I mean, it's like, okay, sure. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a different world. Well, you mentioned briefly, but you are involved, I know, in a lot of different nonprofits and community organizations. Tell me a little bit more about your work with these.
So my second year of law school, I was an intern at this nonprofit in San Francisco called Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And what they did was help reunify families after they were part of the criminal justice system. And I'm now serving on their board of directors. So my business, my relationship with this nonprofit had got started from second year of law school until today, which is what, like 15 years. And they were actually the nonprofit that took me under their wing when I started my own nonprofit under their own umbrella, so that I didn't have to start my own 501c3. So I love that organization. I also serve on the board for another nonprofit, a national nonprofit called Defy Ventures, and that's where we help entrepreneurs in training that are getting ready to be released from prison walls and just re-enter society. Some of the most meaningful work that I've ever done was as a board member for a nonprofit called Insight Prison Project. And what they did was they would bring victims of crimes to have meaningful conversations that allowed the people that were accused of those crimes apologize and, have a form of restorative justice. It's like, outside of being sentenced, that doesn't necessarily make a person or a victim whole. So they would bring those two parties together. Or let's say, this is just a hypothetical, if somebody died from a murder, that person who's deceased wouldn't be able to obviously partake in that conversation, but somebody else who had a similar victim of being of losing somebody through crime would have that conversation with somebody in a similar situation that was behind prison walls. So it really helped the healing process for people to understand that hurt people. And that was just some of the most meaningful work that I've ever done that I'm still involved with, which is, helping hurt people get unhurt.
And that would definitely be a very beneficial thing for the world if we can all do that.
Yeah.
I think breaking those, sort of generational cycles of trauma is so, obviously so difficult, but also so, so important if you can actually help people do that.
I mean, I grew up from the hood, so I walk around like I wish a MF would, but then I stop myself and say, wait a minute, people treat you the way that they treat themselves. So I just try to, be more emotionally mature and have more compassion and operate that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it sounds like it's kind of working out for your business. I'm sure
Thank
people
you.
appreciate that that sensation when they come in. Well, do you have any advice for law students who might be interested in getting into criminal defense work? Anything you did in law school that you thought was particularly useful, or even afterwards?
I would say try to intern at the public defender's office or the district attorney's office so you can actually find your voice in court. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, the author of several books, Outliers and all that, who said in order to be an expert at something, you have to do, I think, like 5 or 10,000 hours of it, which is 5 years of working somewhere full time. And so, if you really want to be a gladiator in the courtroom, start in law school, getting internships at places where you'll actually be in court and get to observe, and maybe, if it makes sense, jump in and make some arguments on the record. Um, the other thing I would say is the more haters you have, the better. I had a lot of people, you know, um, hate on me because of my differences. And frankly, to rely on just being academic or scholarly as your identity is pretty boring. You want to set yourself apart. And when you do that, haters are going to hate, but let them. It means you're doing something right. So go get some life experience and make yourself something different from outside what you put on your resume.
I think that's great advice. I mean, I definitely think I learned as much doing like pro bono projects that I took on even my very first year of our first semester in law school, where I did some projects at like the Bronx Family Court. Like I was in school at Columbia, and and then like one morning I show up in like the family court in the Bronx, and it's like, wow, this is really different. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
let me roll with this one. But it was actually, it was great, and my clients were super interesting. The same thing, I did like a pro bono divorce case, and that went on forever in San Francisco. But I had like an amazing client, totally different world view and everything. I was like, this is actually, I feel like, very enriching for me as a person, not to mention what, I'm hopefully doing for her.
Yeah. And, I was so naive when I first started law school. I remember I was in my mid 20s when I was taking a prep school at, near UCLA to take the LSAT. And there was like this, you know, Asian guy who was like in his mid 40s who was also taking the LSATs. And he's like, my whole family has been, lawyers, and your LSAT gets you into the right school. Your right school gets you the highest paying job. So it all starts here, and you better do really well before, and I remember I was so naive. I was like, I'm hitting 146 on my LSAT. Like that's nothing. And I took it a second time and I got a 150. So I just, went to bed thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I have a bright future ahead of me. But, you know, trust what you hear, but verify it, because some of the people that hit high LSATs and graduated at the top of their class were also some of the people who are asking me for work, and I graduated at the bottom 2% of my class. So don't believe everything you hear.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that kind of factor into success after school that do not necessarily, factor into in-school success and vice versa. I've even seen data on this. The people who love law school generally do not love practicing, and vice versa.
And people want to hire and work with people that they like. So
Yeah, which
don't
is
be
a problem for a lot of law students. Not the most likable people sometimes.
and you know what? You can change that and be a likable person by
That's true.
just looking at your own personal values, because I'm not proud of the person that I was in my early 20s.
No, like Lee and I always say, you know what? Like everyone in law school should be in therapy. Like I went to therapy. No, I'm kidding. I mean, I'm totally serious. Like I was clinically depressed my first year of law school and my second semester. And I went to therapy, and I was like, this is probably like the most eye-opening thing I've ever done. And it made me a fundamentally like happier person. It probably made me a more likable person because I understood other people better. But, I think there's a lot of merit in kind of working on yourself and understanding yourself, because like we said, this is a people business.
Yeah, and the first time that I went to therapy, coming from a Filipino background and household where we don't talk about mental health, I
Right.
was born in the Philippines, so when I went to therapy, it was it was like, who died? Are you getting a divorce? Like, what's happening? And I remember my first session with my therapist. She's like, why did you decide to come to therapy? And I said, well, I read that personal development precedes professional development, and I want to make my first million. So let's do this. And
Nice.
like, years later, I was like, making $1 million isn't as important as, loving myself.
Well, at least it set you on a path to being financially stable. The million is not the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Making money while I sleep is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, if law students are thinking like, oh, this sounds great, I want to like start my own practice, my own nonprofit, and do all these things, do you have any advice for them to be thinking about now, or things to be sort of working on other than therapy?
Yeah, you want to find mentors that are in alignment with your values. When I first started, there were a lot of mentors that I had that I just wouldn't frankly invite to like a family barbecue or would want to hang out with outside of, maybe learning the skill set. But a lot of the mentors that I did find that were in alignment with my values are people that I've, had long relationships with. So there are people out there that are doing what you're doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Make friends with them. Be clear about wanting to be their mentee, and maintain relationships with the ones that you want to be like, not just professionally, but personally as well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, you can even think of people in law school, whether, maybe someone who's working with you in a clinic or a professor you really like those are great relationships to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like we said earlier, your classmates, like it or not, these are the people that you are graduating with, you're going through this process with. And I feel like most people, there's probably somebody or a couple of people at least who are your people.
Mm-hmm.
Even if on the whole, you might be like, I don't know that I want to hang out with these people after these 3 years are up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just surround yourself. If you're an average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, cut out the energy sucking vampires that take that out of you, but keep it cool.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely, I feel like probably every law school has those people who are, you're just like, wow, you are really not being very nice right now. Like, I remember I had a bunch of parties because we had a big apartment, and I heard somebody say one time something truly awful to someone else. And I was like, you're going to have to leave the party if you're going to behave like this. Like, I need you to apologize and also stop with the whole like line of thought, or like, you need to leave my party. I'm sorry. Like, you can't be here if you're going to behave like this.
I remember a first year of law school, I threw a huge rager at my apartment called, it was a property term. I forget what the term was, but it was like anyway, it was a spinoff of one of the things that we just recently learned. And my roommates were like, Givelle, it's so bad for your reputation that you're inviting a professors to a party with a keg called, whatever. And I was like, whatever. We're all
That's
human.
funny. Yeah, I will say we did not invite professors, but I had like TAs and things there at least. It was actually, it's funny because I was a TA my second year, and we'd had this pretty big party opening the season. And this guy in my class came up to me the first day, and he's like, oh, you look really familiar. Like, were you at that party this weekend? I was like, you were at my party. I don't know you. I don't know how you got into it. And also, I'm your TA. And he just sort of turned red and was like, oh, sorry. It was a good party.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, law school. I know that it seems like hell. They say 1L, they try to kill you.
They like, first year they scare you to death. Second year they work you to death. And third year they bore you to death.
Enjoy that third year.
Yeah, no, third year was great. I remember I had like 4 or 5 day weekends. Like, it was awesome. All right, well, we are about out of time here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, just thanks for having me. And
this has been so fun. Thank you so much. Well, remind us where people can find out more about you and your work if they would like to do that.
Go to Linktree, which is linktr.ee/Lamano Law.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really great.
Thank you.
My pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.